लेट्स कंटिन्यू विद द चैप्टर 7 पेज नंबर 87. ठीक है, तो अभी हम चैप्टर 7 पे हैं एंड वी आर कंटिन्यूइंग विद इट. पेज नंबर 87. What happened to the local schools? Do you have any idea of how the children were taught in the pre-British times? Have you ever wondered whether they went to schools, and if there were schools, what happened to these under the British rule? The report of the William Adam. In the 1830s, William Adam, uh, a Scottish missionary, he made a tour of the districts of the Bengal and Bihar, and he had been asked by the company to report on the progress of education in vernacular schools. The report Adam produced is interesting. Adam found that there were over 1 lakh pathshalas in Bengal and Bihar. They were small institutions with no more than 20 students each, but the total number of children being taught in these pathshalas was considerable, over 20 lakh. And these institutions were set up by the wealthy people or the local community. At times, they were started by a teacher guru. The system of education was flexible. Few things that you associate with the schools today were present in the pathshalas at the time. There were no fixed fee, no printed books, no separate school building, no benches or chairs, no blackboards, no system of separate classes, no roll call registers, no annual examination, no regular timetable. In some places, the classes were held under a banyan tree. In other places, in the corner of a village, shop, or temple, or at the guru's home. The fee depended on the income of the parents. The rich had to pay more than the poor. The teaching was oral, and the guru decided what to teach in accordance with the needs of the students. The students were not separated out into different classes, all of them sat together in one place. The guru interacted separately with the groups of the children with the different levels of learning. Adam discovered that this flexible system was suited to the local needs. For instance, the classes were not held during the harvest time when the rural children often worked in the fields. The Pathshala started once again when the crops had been cut and stored. This meant that even children of the peasants' family could study. फिर आता है श्री औरबिंदो घोष. In a speech delivered on January 15, 1908 in Bombay, Aurobindo Ghosh stated that the goal of national education was to awaken the spirit of nationality among the students. It required a contemplation of the heroic deeds of our ancestors. The education should be imparted in the vernacular so as to reach the largest number of the people. Aurobindo Ghosh emphasized that although the students should remain connected to their own roots, they should also take the fullest advantage of the modern scientific discoveries and Western experiments in the popular governments. Moreover, the students should also learn some useful crafts so that they could be able to find some moderately remunerative employment after leaving their schools. For new routines, new rules. Up to the mid 17th century, the company was concerned primarily with the higher education, so it allowed the local pathshalas to function without much interference. After 1854, the company decided to improve the system of vernacular education. It felt that this could be done by introducing order within the system, imposing routines, establishing rules, ensuring regular inspections. How were this to be done? What measures did the company undertake? It appointed a number of government pundits, each in the charge of looking after 4 to 5 schools. The task of the Pandit was to visit the pathshalas and try improve the standard of teaching. Each guru was asked to submit the periodic reports and take classes according to a regular timetable. Teaching was now to be based on the textbook and learning was to be tested through a system of annual examination. Students were asked to pay a regular fee, attend regular classes, sit on the fixed seats, and obey the new rules of the discipline. Pathshalas accepted the new rules were supported through the government grants. Those who were unwilling to work within the new system received no government support. The overtime gurus who wanted to retain their independence found it difficult to compete with the government aided and regulated pathshalas. The new rules and the routine had another consequences. In the earlier system, the children from the poor peasant families were able to go to pathshalas since the timetable was flexible. The discipline of the new system demanded regular attendance even during the harvest time when the children of poor families had to work in the fields. Inability to attend the school came to be seen as indiscipline, as evidence of the lack of desire to learn. The agenda for a national education. British officials were not the only people thinking about education in India. From the early 19th century, many thinkers from the different parts of India began to talk of the need for a wider spread of education. Impressed with the developments in the Europe, some Indians felt that the Western education would help modernize India. They urged the British to open the more schools, colleges, and universities and spend more money on education. We will read about some of these efforts in chapter 9. There were other Indians, however, who reacted against the Western education. Mahatma Gandhi, Rabindranath Tagore were against it. Let us look at what they had to say. English education has enslaved us. Mahatma Gandhi argued that the colonial education created a sense of inferiority in the minds of Indians. It made them see the Western civilization as superior and destroyed the pride they had in their own culture. There was poison in this education, said Mahatma Gandhi. It was sinful, it enslaved Indians, it cast an evil spell on them. Charmed by the West, appreciating everything that came from the West, Indians educated in these institutions began admiring British rule. Mahatma Gandhi wanted an education that would help Indians recover their sense of dignity and self respect. During the national movement, he urged the students to leave the educational institutions in order to show to the British that Indians were no longer willing to be enslaved. Mahatma Gandhi strongly felt that Indian language ought to be the medium of teaching. Education in the English crippled Indians, distanced them from their own social surroundings, made them strangers in their own lands. Speaking a foreign tongue, despising local culture, the English educated did not know how to really relate to the masses. The Western education, Mahatma Gandhi said, focused on reading and writing rather than oral knowledge. It valued textbooks rather than the lived experience and practical knowledge. He argued that education ought to develop a person's mind and soul. Literacy or simple learning to read and write by itself did not count as education. People had to work with their hands, learn a craft, and know how different things operated. This would develop their mind and their capacity to understand. Mahatma Gandhi, along with Kasturba Gandhi, sitting with Rabindranath Tagore and a group of girls at Shanti Niketan 1940. फिर लिटरेसी इन itself is not education. महात्मा गांधी ने कहा कि by education I mean all round drawing out of the best in child and man, the body, mind and spirit. Literacy is not the end of education nor even the beginning. It is only one of the means whereby the man in education can be educated. Literacy in itself is not education. I would therefore begin the child's education by teaching it a useful handicraft and enabling it to produce from the moment it begins its training. I hold that the highest development of the mind and the soul is possible under such a system of education. Only every handicraft has to be taught, not merely mechanically as is done today, but scientifically. That is, the child should know the why and the wherefore of every process. As the nationalist sentiment spread, the other thinkers also began thinking of a system of national education which would be radically different from that which is set up by the British. The Tagore Abode of Peace. Many of you must have heard of Shanti Ketan. Do you know why it was established and by whom? Rabindranath Tagore started the institution in 1901, Shanti Niketan. As a child, Tagore hated going to school. He found it suffocating and oppressive. The school appeared like a prison, for he could never do what he felt like doing. So while other children listened to the teacher, Tagore's mind would wander away. The experience of his school days in Calcutta shaped Tagore's idea of education. On growing up, he wanted to set up a school where the child was happy, where she could be free and creative, where she was able to explore her own thoughts and desires. Tagore felt that childhood ought to be a time of self learning outside the rigid and restricting discipline of the schooling system set up by the British. The teachers had to be imaginative, understanding the child, and help the child develop her curiosity. According to Tagore, the existing schools kill the natural desire of the child to be creative, her sense of wonder. Tagore was of the view that the creative learning could be encouraged only within a natural environment. So he chose to set up his school 100 kilometers away from Calcutta in a rural setting. He saw it as an abode of peace, Shanti Niketan, where living in harmony with the nature, children could cultivate their natural creativity. In many senses, Tagore and Mahatma Gandhi thought about education in similar ways. There were, however, differences too. Gandhiji was highly critical of Western civilization and its worship of machines and technology. Tagore wanted to combine elements of modern Western civilization with what he saw as the best within Indian tradition. He emphasized the need to teach science and technology at Shanti Niketan, along with art, music, and dance. Many individuals and thinkers were thus thinking about the way a national education system could be fashioned. Some wanted changes within the system set up by the British and felt that the system could be extended so as to include wider sections of people. Others urged that alternative systems be created so that people were educated into a culture that was truly national. Who was to define what was truly national? The debate about what this national education ought to be continued till after independence. Mm, the children are playing in a missionary school in the Coimbatore, early 20th century. By the mid 19th century, the schools for the girls were being set up by the Christian missionaries and the Indian reform organizations. Education as a civilizing mission. Until the introduction of the Education Act in 1870, there was no widespread education for the population as a whole for most of the 19th century. The child labor being widely prevalent, poor children could not be sent to school for their earning was critical for the survival of the family. The number of the schools was also limited to those run by the church or set up by wealthy individuals. It was only after the coming into the force of Education Act that the schools were opened by the government and compulsory schooling was introduced. One of the most important educational thinker of the period was Thomas Arnold, who became the headmaster of the private school Rugby, favoring a secondary school curriculum which had a detailed study of the Greek and Roman classics written 2000 years earlier. He said, "It has always seemed to me one of the great advantages of the course of study generally pursued in our English schools that it draws our minds so continually to dwell upon the past. Every day we are engaged in studying language, history, thoughts of men who lived nearly or more than 2000 years ago." Arnold felt that a study of classic disciplined the mind. In fact, most educators of the time believed that such a discipline was necessary because young people were naturally savage and needed to be controlled. To become civilized adults, they needed to understand society's notions of right and wrong, the proper and improper behavior. Education, especially one which disciplined their minds, was meant to guide them on this path. The next chapter, Women, Caste and Reform. Sati, painted by Balthazar Solvian, was one of the pictures of Sati painted by the European artist who came to India. Sati was seen as a evidence of the barbarism of the East. Have you ever thought of how children lived about 200 years ago? Nowadays, most girls from the middle class families go to school and they often study with boys. On growing up, many of them go to colleges and universities and take up jobs after that. They have to be adults before they are legally married, and according to law, they can marry anyone they like from any caste and community, and widows can remarry too. All women, like all men, can vote and stand for elections. Of course, these rights are not actually enjoyed by all. Poor people have little no access to education, and in many families, women cannot choose their husbands. The 200 years ago, things were very different. Most children were married off at an early age. Both Hindu and Muslim men could marry more than one wife. In some parts of the country, the widows were praised if they chose death by burning themselves on the funeral pyre of their husbands. Women who died in this manner, whether willingly or otherwise, were called sati, meaning virtuous women. The women's right to property were also restricted. Besides, most women had virtually no access to education. In many parts of the country, people believed that if a woman was educated, she would become a widow. Differences between the men and women were not the only ones in the society. In the most regions, people were divided along the lines of the caste. The Brahmins, Kshatriyas considered themselves as upper caste. Others, such as traders, moneylenders, often referred to as Vaishyas, were placed after them. Then came the peasants and artisans, such as weavers and potters, referred to as Shudra. And at the lowest rank were those who labored to keep cities and villages clean or worked at jobs at upper caste considered polluting. That is, it could lead to loss of caste status. The upper caste also treated many of these groups at the bottoms as untouchables. They were not allowed to enter temples, draw water from the wells used by the upper caste, or bathe in the ponds from where the upper caste bathed. They were seen as inferior human beings. Over the 19th and the 20th centuries, many of these norms and perceptions slowly changed. Let us see how this happened. The working towards change. From the early 19th century, we find debates and discussions about the social customs and practices taking on a new character. One important reason for this was the development of the new forms of communication. For the first time, the books, newspapers, magazines, the leaflets, the pamphlets were printed. These were far cheaper and far more accessible than the manuscripts that you have read about in class 8th. Therefore, ordinary people could read these, and many of them could also write and express their ideas in their own languages. All kind of issues, social, political, economic, religious, could now be debated and discussed by men, and sometimes by women as well in the new cities. The discussions could reach out to a wider public and could become linked to the movements for social change. These debates were often initiated by the Indian reformers and reform groups. One such reformer was Raja Ram Mohan Rai, 1772-1833. He founded a reform association known as the Brahmo Sabha, later known as the Brahmo Samaj in Calcutta. People such as Ram Mohan Roy are described as the reformers because they felt that the changes were necessary in society and unjust practices need to be done away with. They thought that the best way to ensure such changes was by persuading people to give up the old practices and adopt a new way of life. Ram Mohan Rai was keen to spread the knowledge of Western education in the country and bring about the greater freedom and equality for the women. He wrote about the way women were forced to bear the burden of domestic work, confined to the home and the kitchen, and not allowed to move out and become educated, changing the lives of the widows. Ram Mohan Roy was particularly moved by the problems widows faced in their lives. He began a campaign against the practice of sati. Ram Mohan Rai was well versed in Sanskrit, Persian, and several other Indian European languages. He tried to show through his writings that the practice of the widow burning had no sanction in the ancient texts. By the early 17th century, as you have read in chapter 7, many British officials had also begun to criticize the Indian trading and the customs. They were therefore more than willing to listen to Ram Mohan, who was reputed to be a learned man. In 1829, sati was banned. The strategy adopted by Ram Mohan was used by the later reformers as well. Whenever they wished to challenge a practice that seemed harmful, they tried to find a verse or sentence in the ancient sacred texts that supported their point of view. They then suggested that the practice as it existed at present was against the early tradition. फिर रिचुअल वर्शिप हुआ करती थी जिसमें द हुक्स Passed through their skin, they swung themselves on a wheel. In the early 19th century, when the European officials began criticizing Indian customs and rituals as barbaric, this was one of the rituals that came under the attack. Fair. We first tie them down to the pile. Ram Mohan Roy published many pamphlets to spread the ideas. They were written as a dialogue between the advocate and a critic of a traditional practice. Here is one such. Advocate of Sati. Women are by nature of inferior understanding, without resolution, unworthy of trust. Many of them, on the death of their husbands, become desirous of accompanying them, but to remove every chance of their trying to escape from the blazing fire, in burning them, we first tie them down to the pile. Opponent of Sati. When did you ever afford them with a fair opportunity of exhibiting their natural capacity? How then can you accuse them of want of understanding, if after instruction in knowledge and wisdom, a person cannot comprehend or retain what has been taught him? We may consider him as deficient, but if you do not educate women, how can you see them as inferior? For instance, one of the most famous reformers, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, used the ancient text to suggest the widows could remarry. His suggestion was adopted by the British officials and the law was passed in 1856, permitting the widow remarriage. Those who were against the remarriage of widows opposed Vidyasagar and even boycotted him. By the second half of the 19th century, the movement in the favor of the widow remarriage spread to other parts of the country. In the Telugu speaking areas of the Madras Presidency, Veera Salangam Pantulu formed an association for the widow remarriage. Around the same time, the young intellectuals and reformers in the Bombay pledged themselves to working for the same cause. In the north, Swami Dayanand Saraswati, who founded the Reform Association called the Arya Samaj, also supported the widow remarriage. Yet the number of the widows who actually remarried remained low. Those who married were not easily accepted in society, and conservative groups continued to oppose the new law. The Swami Dayanand Saraswati Dayanand founded the Arya Samaj in 1875, an organization that attempted to reform the Hinduism. फिर आता है ईश्वर चंद्र विद्यासागर, द स्टूडेंट्स ऑफ द हिंदू महिला विद्यालय. When the girls' schools was first set up in 19th century, it was generally believed that the curriculum for the girls ought to be less taxing than that for boys. The Hindu Mahila Vidyalaya was one of the first institutions to provide girls with the kind of learning that was essential for the boys at that time. Hindu Mahila Vidyalaya. फिर girls began going to school. Many of the reformers felt that education for girls was necessary in order to improve the condition of a woman. Vidyasagar in Calcutta, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar in Calcutta, and many other reformers in Bombay set up the schools for the girls. When the first schools were opened in the mid-19th century, many people were afraid of them. They feared that the schools would take away the girls from home, prevent them from doing their domestic duties. Moreover, girls had to travel through the public places in order to reach a school. Many felt that this would have a corrupting influence on them. They felt that girls should stay away from public spaces. Therefore, throughout the 19th century, most educated women were taught at home by the liberal fathers or husbands. Sometimes women taught themselves. Do you remember what you read about Raj Sundari Devi in your book Social and Political Life last year? She was one of those who secretly learned to read and write in the flickering light of the candles at the night. In the latter part of the century, the schools for the girls were established by the Arya Samaj in Punjab and Jyoti Rao Phule in Maharashtra. In the aristocratic Muslim households in North India, the women learned to read the Quran in Arabic. They were taught by the women who came home to teach. Some reformers, such as Mumtaz Ali, reinterpreted the verses from the Quran to argue for the women's education. The first Urdu novels began to be written from the late 19th century. Among the other things, these were meant to encourage women to read about the religion and domestic management in a language they could understand. Women write about women. From the early 20th century, the Muslim women like the Begum of Bhopal played notable role in promoting education among the women. They founded a primary school for the girls at Aligarh. Another remarkable woman, Begum Ruqayya Shekhawat Hussain, started schools for the Muslim girls in Patna and Calcutta. She was a fearless critic of conservative ideas, arguing that the religious leaders of every faith accorded an inferior place to women. By the 1880, Indian women began to enter universities. 1880. Some of them trained to be doctors, some became teachers, many began to write and publish their critical views on the place of women in society. The Tarabhai Shinde, a woman educated at home at Pune, published a book, Stri Purush Tulna, a comparison between women and men, criticizing social difference between the men and women. Pandita Ramibai, a great scholar of Sanskrit, felt that Hinduism was oppressive towards women and wrote a book about the miserable lives of upper caste Hindu women. She founded a widow's home at Pune to provide shelter to widows who had been treated badly by their husbands, relatives. Here, women were trained so that they could support themselves economically. Needless to say, all this was more than alarmed the Orthodox. For instance, many Hindu nationalists felt that Hindu women were adopting Western ways and this would corrupt the Hindu culture and erode the family values. Orthodox Muslims were also worried about the impact of these changes. As you can see, by the end of the 19th century, women themselves were actively working for reform. They wrote books and edited magazines, founded schools and training centers, set up the women's associations. From the early 20th century, they formed political pressure groups to push through the laws for the female suffrage, the right to vote, and better healthcare and education for women. Some of them joined various kinds of nationalist and the socialist movements from the 1920s. In the 20th century, leaders such as Jawaharlal Nehru and Subhash Chandra Bose lent their support to demands for greater equality and freedom for women. Nationalist leaders promised that there would be full suffrage for all men and women after independence. However, till then, they asked women to concentrate on the anti British struggles. The law against the child marriage. With the growth of the women's organization and writings on these issues, the momentum for reform gained strength. People challenged another established custom, that of child marriage. There were a number of Indian legislators in the Central Legislative Assembly who fought to make a law preventing child marriage. In 1929, the Child Marriage Restraint Act was passed without the kind of bitter debates and struggles that earlier laws had seen. According to the Act, no man below the age of 18 and woman below the age of 16 could marry. Subsequently, these limits were raised to 21 for men and 18 for women. 20% of the girls in India are married below the age of 18. The caste and social reforms. Some of the social reformers we have been discussing also criticized the caste inequalities. Ram Mohan Roy translated an old Buddhist text that was critical of the caste. The Pratna Samaj adhered to the tradition of bhakti that believed in spiritual equality of all castes. In Bombay, the Paramhans Mandali was founded in 1840 to work for abolition of caste. Many of these reformers and members of reform associations were the people of the upper caste. Often in the secret meetings, these reformers would violate the caste taboos on the food and touch in an effort to get rid of the hold of caste prejudice in their lives. There were also others who questioned the injustices of the caste social order. During the course of the 19th century, the Christian missionaries began setting up schools for the tribal groups and the lower caste children. These children were thus equipped with some resources to make their way into a changing world. At the same time, the poor began leaving their villages to look for the jobs that were opening up in the cities. There was work in the factories that were coming up and jobs in municipalities. You have read about the expansion of the cities in the chapter 6. Think of the new demands of the labor this created. The drains had to be dug, the roads laid, the buildings constructed, the cities cleaned. This required coolies, diggers, carriers, the bricklayers, the sewage cleaners, the sweepers, the bearers, the rickshaw pullers. Where did this labor come from? The poor from the village and the small towns, many of them from the low caste, began moving to the cities where there was a new demand for labor. Some also went to work in plantations in the Assam, Mauritius, Trinidad, Indonesia. The work in the new locations was often very hard, but the poor, the people from the low caste, saw this as an opportunity to get away from the oppressive hold that upper caste landowners exercised over their lives and the daily humiliation they suffered. This coolie ship named John Allen carried many Indian laborers to Mauritius where they did a variety of forms of hard labor. Many of them were from the low caste. The leather workers uh, were traditional in contempt because they worked with dead animals, seen dirty, polluting. During First World War, however, there was a huge demand for shoes for the armies. The caste prejudice against the leather work meant that only the traditional leather work and shoemakers were ready to supply army shoes, so they could ask for high prices and gain the impressive profits. The Madi gas making shoes, the 19th century Andhra Pradesh. Madi gas were the important untouchable caste of Andhra Pradesh. They were expert at cleaning hides, tanning them for use, and sewing sandals. There were other jobs too. The army, for instance, offered opportunities. A number of Mahar people, MAHAL, who were regarded as untouchable, found jobs in the Mahar regiment. The father of B.R. Ambedkar, the leader of Dalit movement, taught at an army school. In no place inside the classroom. In the Bombay Presidency, as late as 1829, untouchables were not allowed to even enter into government schools. When some of them pressed hard for their right, they were allowed to sit on the veranda outside the classroom and listen to the lessons without polluting the room where the upper caste boys were taught. The Dublas of the Gujarat carrying the mangoes to the market. Dublas labored for the upper caste landowners, cultivating their fields, working at variety of odd jobs at the landlord house. The demands for equality and justice. Demands for equality and justice. Gradually, by the second half of the 19th century, people from within the non-Brahmin caste began organizing movement against the caste discrimination and demanded social equality and justice. The Satnami movement in central India was founded by Ghasi Das, who worked among the leather worker and organized a movement to improve their social status. In the eastern Bengal, Haridas Thakur Matua sect worked among the Chandala cultivators. Haridas questioned Brahmanical texts that supported the caste system. In what is present day Kerala, a guru from Isjava caste, Sri Narayan Guru, proclaimed the ideals of unity for his people. He argued against treating people unequally on the basis of caste differences. According to him, all the humankind belonged to the same caste. One of his famous statements was Oru Jati, Oru Matam, Oru Devam Mangushyan, one caste, one religion, one God for humankind. All these sects were founded by the leaders who came from the non Brahmin caste and worked amongst them. They tried to change those habits and practices which provoke the contempt of dominant caste. They tried to create a sense of self esteem among the subordinate caste. The Gulamgiri. One of the most vocal amongst the low caste leaders was Jyoti Rao Phule. Born in 1827, he studied in schools set up by the Christian missionaries. On growing up, he developed his own ideas about the injustice of the caste society. He set out to attack the Brahmins' claim that they were superior to others since they were Aryans. Phule argued that the Aryans were the foreigners who came from outside the subcontinent and defeated and subjugated the true children of the country, those who had lived here from before the coming of the Aryans. As the Aryans established their dominance, they began looking at the defeated population as inferior as a low caste people. According to Phule, the upper caste had no right to the land and power. In reality, the land belonged to indigenous people, the so called low caste. Phule claimed that before Aryan rule, there existed a golden age when the warrior peasants tilled the land and ruled the Maratha countryside in just and fair ways. He proposed that the Shudras, the laboring caste, and Ati Shudras, the untouchables, should unite to challenge the caste discrimination. The Satya Shodhak Samaj, an association Phule founded, propagated the caste equality. Phule was also critical of the anti colonial nationalism that was preached by the upper caste leaders. He wrote कि Brahmins have hidden away the sword of the religion, which has cut the throat of the people prosperity, and now go about posing as great patriots of their country. They give this advice to our Shudra, Muslim and Parsi youth that unless we put away all the quarreling among ourselves about the divisions between the high and low in our country and come together, our country will never make any progress. It will be the unity to serve their purposes, and then it will be me here and you over there again. In 1873, Phule wrote a book named Gulamgiri, meaning slavery. Some 10 years before this, the American Civil War had been fought, leading to the end of slavery in America. Phule dictated his book to all to all those Americans who had fought to free slaves, thus establishing a link between the conditions of the lower caste in India and the black slaves in America. As this example shows, Phule extended his criticism of the caste system to argue against all the forms of inequality. He was concerned about the light of the upper caste woman, the miseries of the laborer, and the humiliation of the low caste. This movement for the caste reform was continued in the 20th century by the other great Dalit leaders like Dr. B.R. Ambedkar in West India and E.V. Ramaswamy Naikar in the south. Who could enter temples? The untouchables were not allowed anywhere near gateways until the temple entry movement began. Who could enter the temples? The Ambedkar was born into a Meher family. As a child, he experienced what the caste prejudice meant in everyday life. In school, he was forced to sit outside the classroom on the ground and was not allowed to drink water from the taps that the upper caste children used. After finishing school, he got a fellowship to go to US for higher studies. On his return to India in 1919, he wrote extensively about the upper caste power in contemporary society. 1927, Ambedkar started a temple entry movement in which his Meher caste followers participated. The Brahmin priests were outraged when the Dalits used water from the temple tank. Ambedkar led three such movements for temple entry between 1927 and 1935. His aim was to make everyone see the power of the caste prejudice within the society. The non Brahmin movement. In the early 20th century, the non Brahmin movement started. The initiative came from those non Brahmin castes that had acquired access to education, wealth, and influence. Uh, they argued that the Brahmins were the heirs of the Aryan invaders from the north who had conquered certain lands from the original inhabitants of the region, the indigenous Dravidian races. They also challenged Brahminical claims to power. E.V. Ramaswamy Naikar on Periyar, as he was called, came from a middle class family. Interestingly, he had been an ascetic in his early life and had studied Sanskrit scriptures carefully. Later, he became a member of the Congress only to leave it in disgust when he found that at a feast organized by nationalists, seating arrangements followed caste distinctions. That is, the lower caste were made to sit at a distance from the upper caste. Convinced that untouchables had to fight for their dignity, Periyar founded the self respect movement. He argued that untouchables were the true upholders of an original Tamil and Dravidian culture that had been subjugated by the Brahmins. He felt that all the religious authorities saw the social divisions and inequality as God given. Untouchables had to free themselves, therefore, from all the religions in order to achieve the social equality. Periyar was an outspoken critic of Hindu scriptures, especially the codes of Manu, the ancient lawgiver, and the Bhagavad Gita and the Ramayana. He said that these texts had been used to establish the authority of the Brahmins over the low caste and the domination of the men over the women. These assertions did not go unchallenged. The forceful speeches, the writings, the movements of the lower caste leaders did lead to rethinking and some self criticism among the upper caste nationalist leaders. But Orthodox Hindu society also reacted by founding Sanatan Dharm Sabha and the Bharat Dharm Mahamandal in the north and associations like Brahman Sabha in Bengal. The object of these associations was to uphold the caste distinctions as a cornerstone of Hinduism and show how this was sanctified by scriptures. Debates and struggles over the caste continued beyond the colonial period and are still going on in our own times. अच्छा, ये जो ईवी रामास्वामी नाइकर थे, इन्हीं को पेरियार कहा जाता था। ठीक है, इन्होंने कास्ट के लिए लड़ा था, औरतों के लिए लड़ा था। इनका था सेल्फ रिस्पेक्ट मूवमेंट। फिर देखो केशव चंद्र सेन, वन ऑफ द मेन लीडर्स ऑफ ब्रह्मो समाज. The Brahmo Samaj formed in 1830 prohibited all forms of idolatry and sacrifice, believed in the Upanishads, and forbids its members from criticizing other religious practices. It critically drew upon the ideas of religions, especially of Hinduism and Christianity, looking at their negative and positive dimensions. The Deroziu and the Young Bengal. Henry Deroziu. Henry Louis Vivian Deroziu was a teacher at Hindu College, Calcutta in the 1820s, promoting radical ideas and encouraged his pupil to question all the authority. Referred to as the Young Bengal movement, his students attacked the tradition custom, demanded education for women, and campaigned for the freedom of the thought and expression. फिर रामकृष्णा मिशन and Swami Vivekananda. Named after Ramakrishnan Paramhansa, Swami Vivekananda Guru, the Ramakrishna mission stressed the ideal of salvation through social service and selfless action. Swami Vivekananda, whose original name was Narendranath Datta, combined the simple teachings of Sri Ramakrishna with his well founded modern outlook and spread them all over the world. After hearing him in the World Parliament of Religions at Chicago in 1893, the New York Herald reported, "We feel how foolish it is to send missionaries to this learned nation." Indeed, Swami Vivekananda was the first Indian in modern times who re-established the spiritual preeminence of the Vedanta philosophy on a global scale. But his mission was not simply to talk of religion. He was extremely pained at the poverty and the misery of his religion, of his countrymen. He firmly believed that any reform could become successful only by uplifting the condition of the masses. Therefore, his clarion call to the people of India was to rise above the narrow confines of the religion of the kitchen and come together in the service of nation. By sending out this call, he made a single contribution to the nascent nationalism of India. His sense of nationalism was, however, not narrow in its conception. He was convinced that many of the problems facing the mankind could only be overcome if the nations of the world come together on an equal footing. Therefore, his exhortation to the youth was to unite on the basis of a common spiritual heritage. In this exhortation, he became truly the symbol of a new spirit and a source of strength for the future. The Pratna Samaj. Established in 1867 at Bombay, the Pratna Samaj sought to remove the caste restrictions, abolish the child marriage, encourage the education of women, and end the ban on the widow remarriage. Its religious meetings drew upon Hindu, Buddhist, and Christian texts. The Ved Samaj. Established in Madras, Chennai in 1864, the Ved Samaj was inspired by the Brahmo Samaj. It worked to abolish caste distinctions and promote the widow remarriage and women education. Its members believed in the one God. They condemned the superstitions and the rituals of the Orthodox Hinduism. ठीक है फिर the Aligarh movement, the Mohammedan Anglo-Oriental College founded by Sayyid Ahmad Khan in 1875 at Aligarh later became the Aligarh Muslim University. The institution offered modern education, including Western science, to Muslims. The Aligarh movement, as it was known, had an enormous impact in the area of educational reform. The Singh Sabha movement. The reform organizations of the Sikhs. The first Singh Sabha was formed at Amritsar in 1873 and at Lahore in 1879. The Sabhas sought to rid Sikhism of superstitions, caste distinctions, and practices seen by them as non-Sikh. They promoted education among the Sikhs, often combining modern instruction with the Sikh teaching. The Khalsa College, Amritsar, established in 1892 by the leaders of the Singh Sabha movement, black slaves and the white planters. You have read about how Jyotirao Phule established a connection in his book Ghulam Giri between the caste oppression and the practice of slavery in America. What was the system of slavery? From the time that European explorers and the traders landed in Africa in the 17th century, a trade in slaves began. Black people were captured and brought them from Africa to America, sold to white planters, and made to work on cotton and other plantations, most of them in the southern United States. In the plantations, they had to work long hours, typically from dawn to dusk, punished for inefficient work, and whipped and tortured. Many people, white and black, opposed slavery through organized protest. In doing so, they invoked the spirit of American Revolution of 1776, exhorting, See your declaration, Americans. Do you understand your own language? In his moving Gettysburg Address, Abraham Lincoln held that those who had fought slavery had done so for the cause of democracy. He urged the people to strive for racial equality so that government of the people, by the people, for the people shall not perish from the earth. फिर आता है चैप्टर 9 द मेकिंग ऑफ द नेशनल मूवमेंट 1870-1947. Police tear gas demonstrators during the Quit India movement. The emergence of nationalism. The capacity to act independently without outside interference is called sovereign. The emergence of nationalism. The above mentioned developments led the people to ask a crucial question: what is this country of India and for whom is it meant? The answer that gradually emerged was India was the people of India, all the people, irrespective of the class, color, caste, creed, language, or gender, and the country, its resources and systems were meant for all of them. With this answer came the awareness that the British were exercising control over the resources of India and the lives of its people, and until this control was ended, India could not be for Indians. This consciousness began to be clearly stated by the political associations formed after 1850, especially those that came into being in the 1870s and 1880s. Most of those were led by the English educated professionals such as lawyers. The more important ones were the Pune Sarvajanika Sabha, Indian Association, the Madras Mahajan Sabha, the Bombay Presidency Association, and of course the Indian National Congress. Note the name, the Pune Sarvajanik Sabha. The literal meaning of Sarvajanik is of or for all the people. Though many of these associations functioned in specific parts of the country, their goals were stated as the goals of all the people of India, not those of any one region, community, or class. They worked with the idea that people should be sovereign, a modern consciousness and a key feature of nationalism. In other words, they believed that the Indian people should be empowered to take decisions regarding their affairs. The dissatisfaction with the British rule intensified in the 1870s and 1880s. The Arms Act was passed in 1878, disallowing the Indians from possessing arms. In the same year, the Vernacular Press Act was also enacted in an effort to silence those who were critical of the government. The act allowed the government to confiscate the assets of newspapers, including their printing press, if the newspapers published anything that was found objectionable. In 1883, there was a furor over the attempt by the government to introduce the Ilbert Bill. This bill provided for the trial of the British or European persons by Indians and sought the equality between British and Indian judges in the country. But when the white opposition forced the government to withdraw the bill, the Indians were enraged. The event highlighted the racial attitude of the British in India. The need for an all India organization of educated Indians had been felt since 1880. But the Ilbert Bill controversy deepened this desire. The Indian National Congress was established when the 72 delegates from all over the country met at Bombay in December 1885. The early leadership Dadabhai Naroji, Firoz Shah Mehta, Badruddin Tyabji, the W.C. Banerjee, Surendranath Banerjee, Ramesh Chandra Dutt, S. Subramania Iyer, among others, was largely from Bombay and Calcutta. Naroji, a businessman and publicist, settled in London, and for a time member of the British Parliament, guided the younger nationalist. A retired British official, A.O. Hume, also played a part in bringing Indians from the various regions together. The Badruddin Tyabji addressed the Congress as president in 1887. ठीक है, that is the first National Congress at Bombay. It was addressed by Badruddin Tyabji. A nation in the making. अच्छा, publicist क्या होता है? Someone who put lysis on an idea by circulating information, writing reports, speaking at meetings. Dadabhai Naroji's book Poverty and Un-British Rule in India offered a scathing criticism of the economic impact of the British rule. A nation in the making. It has often been said that the Congress in the first 20 years was moderate in its objectives and methods. During this period, it demanded a greater voice for Indians in the government and in administration. It wanted the legislative councils to be made more representative, given more power, and introduced in provinces where none existed. It demanded that the Indians be placed in high positions in the government. For this purpose, it called for the civil service examinations to be held in India as well, not just in London. The demand for Indianization of the administration was part of a movement against racism, since most important jobs at the time were monopolized by the white officials, and the British generally assumed that Indians could not be given positions of responsibility. Since the British officers were sending a major part of their last salaries home, Indianization, it was hoped, would also reduce the drain of the wealth to England. Other demands include separation of judiciary from executive, the repeal of the Arms Act, and the freedom of speech and expression. The early mm, the early Congress also raised a number of economic issues. It declared that the British rule had led to poverty and famine, increase in the land revenue had impoverished peasant and zamindar, and export of the grain to Europe had created food shortage. The Congress demanded reduction of the revenue, the cut in the military expenditure, and more funds for irrigation. It passed many resolutions on the salt tax, the treatment of Indian laborers abroad, and the sufferings of the forest dwellers caused by interfering forest administration. All this shows that despite being a body of educated elite, the Congress did not talk only on behalf of professional groups, zamindars, or industrialists. The moderate leaders wanted to develop public awareness about the unjust nature of British rule. They published newspapers, they wrote articles, and showed how British rule was leading to the economic ruin of the country. They criticized British rule in their speeches and sent the representatives to different parts of the country to mobilize the public opinion. They felt that the British had respect for the ideals of the freedom and justice, and so they would accept the just demands of Indians. What was necessary, therefore, was to express these demands and make the government aware of the feelings of Indians. Freedom is a birthright. By the 1890s, many Indians began to raise questions about the political style of the Congress. In Bengal, Maharashtra, and Punjab, leaders such as Bipin Chandra Pal, Bal Gangadhar Tilak, and Lala Lajpat Rai were beginning to explore the more radical objectives and methods. They criticized the moderates for their politics of prayers and emphasized the importance of self reliance and constructive work. They argue that people must rely on their own strength and not on the good intentions of the government. People must fight for Swaraj. Tilak raised the slogan, Freedom is my birthright and I shall have it. In 1905, Viceroy Curzon partitioned Bengal. At that time, Bengal was the biggest province of the British India and included Bihar and parts of Orissa. The British argued for dividing Bengal for the reasons of administrative convenience. But what did administrative convenience mean? Whose convenience did it represent? Clearly, it was closely tied to the interest of the British officials and businessmen. Even so, instead of removing the non Bengali areas from the province, the government separated East Bengal and merged it with the Assam. Perhaps the main British motives were to curtail the influence of the Bengali politicians and to split the Bengali people. The partition of the Bengal infuriated people all over India. All the sanctions of the Congress, the moderates and the radicals, as they may be called, opposed it. Large public meetings and demonstrations were organized, and novel methods of the mass protest developed. The struggle that unfolded came to be known as the Swadeshi movement, strongest in Bengal, but with echoes elsewhere too. In Deltic Andhra, for instance, it was known as Vande Mataram movement. Bal Gangadhar Tilak, Kesari, a Maratha newspaper, one of the strong critics of the British rule. 1,000 people joined the demonstrations during the Swadeshi movement. Lala Lajpat Rai is a nationalist from Punjab. He was one of the leading members of the radical group that was critical of the politics of petitions. He was also an active member of Arya Samaj. Revolutionary violence क्या होता है? The use of the violence to make a radical change within the society. Council is an appointed or elected body of the people with an administrative, advisory, or representative function. The Swadeshi movement sought to oppose the British rule and encourage the ideas of self-help, Swadeshi enterprise, national education, and the use of Indian language. To fight for Swaraj, the radicals advocated mass mobilization and boycott of British institutions and the goods. Some individuals also began to suggest that revolutionary violence would be necessary to overthrow the British rule. The opening decades of the 20th century were marked by the other developments as well. A group of Muslim landlords and Nawabs formed the All India Muslim League at Dhaka in 1906. The League supported the partition of Bengal. It desired separate electorates for the Muslims, a demand which is conceded by the government in 1909. Some seats in the councils were now reserved for Muslims who would be elected by the Muslim voters. This tempted the politicians to gather a following by distributing favors to their own religious groups. Meanwhile, the Congress split in 1907. The moderates were opposed to the use of boycott They felt that it involved the use of force. After the split, the Congress came to be dominated by the moderates, with Tilak followers functioning from outside. The two groups reunited in December 1915. Next year, the Congress and the Muslim League signed the historic Lucknow Pact and decided to work together for representative government in the country. The growth of mass nationalization. After 1919, the struggle against the British rule gradually became a mass movement involving peasants, tribal students, and the women in the large numbers, and occasionally factory workers as well. Certain business groups too began to actively support the Congress in the 1920s. Why was this so? The First World War altered the economic and political situation in India. It led to a huge rise in the defense expenditure of the Government of India. The government in India increased the taxes on individual incomes and business profits, increased military expenditure, and the demands for the war supplies led to a sharp rise in prices that created great difficulties for the common people. On the other hand, the business groups reaped the fabulous profits from the war. As you have seen, the war created a demand for the industrial goods, jute bags, cloth, rails, and caused a decline of imports from the other countries into India. So, Indian industries expanded during the war, and Indian business groups began to demand greater opportunities for development. The war also led the British to expand their army. The villages were pressurized to supply the soldiers for an alien cause. A large number of soldiers were sent to serve abroad. Many returned after the war with an understanding of the ways in which the imperialist powers were exploiting the people of Asia and Africa, and with a desire to oppose the colonial rule in India. Furthermore, in 1917, there was a revolution in Russia. News about the peasants and the workers' struggles and ideas of socialism circulated widely, inspiring Indian nationalists. The advent of Mahatma Gandhi. It is in these circumstances that Mahatma Gandhi emerged as a mass leader. As you may know, Gandhiji, 46, arrived in India in 1915 from South Africa. Having led Indians in that country in the non-violent marches against the racist restrictions, he was already a respected leader, known internationally. And his South African campaigns had brought him in contact with various types of Hindus, Indians, Muslims, Parsis, Christians, Gujaratis, Tamils, and the North Indians, and the upper class merchants, lawyers, and the workers. Mahatma Gandhi spent his first year in India traveling throughout the country, understanding the people, needs, and overall situation. His earliest अच्छा ये founders of the Natal Congress NATEL, the Durban, South Africa, in 1895, along with other Indians, Mahatma Gandhi established the Natal Congress to fight against racial discrimination. देखो क्या है, तो गांधी जी का पहला इंटरवेंशन वर इन द लोकल मूवमेंट्स इन द चंपारण, खेड़ा and Ahmedabad, where he came into contact with Rajendra Prasad and Vallabhbhai Patel. In Ahmedabad, he led a successful mill worker strike in 1918. Let us now focus in some detail on the movements organized between 1919 and 1922. The Rowlatt Satyagraha. In 1919, Gandhiji gave a call for a satyagraha against the Rowlatt Act that the British had just passed. The act curbed the fundamental rights such as the freedom of expression and strengthened the police powers. Mahatma expression, Mahatma Gandhi, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, and others felt that the government had no right to restrict the people's basic freedom. They criticized the act as devilish, tyrannical. Gandhiji asked the Indian people to observe 6 April 1919 as a day of non-violent opposition to this act. as a day of humiliation and prayer, and Hartal strike. Satyagraha Sabha was set up as to launch the movement. The Rowlatt Satyagraha turned out to be the first all India struggle against the British government, although it was largely restricted to cities. In April 1919, there were a number of demonstrations and Hartal in the country, and the government used the brutal measures to suppress them. The Jallianwala Bagh atrocities inflicted by General Dyer in Amritsar on Baisakhi Day, 13th April, were the part of this repression. On learning about the massacre, Rabindranath Tagore expressed the pain and anger of the country by renouncing his knighthood. उन्होंने अपना knighthood दे दिया. Knighthood मतलब एक honor होता है which is granted by British Crown for exceptional personal achievement or public service. During the Rowlatt Satyagraha, the participants tried to ensure that Hindus and Muslims were united in the fight against the British rule. This was also the call of Mahatma Gandhi, who always saw India as a land of all the people who lived in the country, Hindu, Muslim, and those of other religions. He was keen that Hindus and Muslims support each other in any just cause. The Khilafat agitation and the non-cooperation movement. The Khilafat issue was one such cause. In 1920, the British imposed a harsh treaty on the Turkish Sultan or Khalifa. People were furious about this as they had been about the Jallianwala massacre. Also, Indian Muslims were keen that the Khalifa be allowed to retain control over Muslim sacred places in the east while Ottoman Empire. The leaders of the Khilafat agitation, Muhammad Ali and Shaukat Ali, now wished to initiate a full-fledged non-cooperation movement. Gandhiji supported their call and urged the Congress to campaign against the Punjab rocks, the Jallianwala massacre, the Khilafat wrong, and demand Swaraj. The non-cooperation movement gained momentum through the 1921-22. Thousands of the students left the government-controlled schools and colleges. Many lawyers like Motilal Nehru, C.R. Das, Rajgopalachari, and Asif Ali gave up their practices. British titles were surrendered and legislatures boycotted. People lit public bonfires of foreign cloth. The imports of the foreign cloth fell drastically between 1920 and 1922. But all this was merely the tip of the iceberg. The large parts of the country were on the brink of a formidable revolt. People's Initiative. In many cases, people resisted British rule non-violently. In others, the different classes and the groups interpreting Gandhiji's call in their own manner protested in the ways that were not in accordance with his ideas. In either case, the people linked their movements to the local grievances. जैसे कि in खेड़ा, Gujarat and Patidar, peasants organized the non-violent campaigns against the highland revenue demand of the British. In the coastal Andhra and the interior Tamil Nadu, the liquor shops were picketed. In the Guntur district of Andhra Pradesh, the tribals and the poor peasants staged a number of forest satyagraha, sometimes sending their cattle into forest without paying grazing fee. They were protesting because the colonial state had restricted the use of forest resources in the various ways. They believed that Gandhiji would get their taxes reduced and have the forest regulations abolished. In many forest villages, the peasants proclaimed Swaraj and believed that Gandhi Raj was about to be established. In Sindh, Pakistan, the Muslim traders and peasants were very enthusiastic about the Khilafat call. In Bengal too, the Khilafat Non-Cooperation Alliance gave enormous communal unity and strength to the national movement. In Punjab, the Akali agitation of the Sikh sought to remove corrupt Mahants supported by the British from their Gurudwaras. This movement got closely identified with the non-cooperation movement. In Assam, the tea gardeners' labours shouting Gandhi Maharaj ki jai, demanded a big increase in the wages. They left the British owned plantations amid declarations that they were following Gandhiji wish. Interestingly, in the Assamese Vaishnava songs of the period, the reference to Krishna was substituted by Gandhi Raj, a popular representation of Mahatma Gandhi. In the popular images too, Mahatma Gandhi is being shown as divine being occupying a place within the pantheon of Indian gods. In this image, he is driving Krishna chariot, guiding other nationalist leaders in the battle against the British. Illegal eviction का क्या मतलब होता है? Forcible and unlawful throwing out of tenants from the land they rent. And महंत क्या होते हैं? Religious functionaries होते हैं of the Sikh Gurudwara. The people Mahatma. We can see from the above that sometimes people thought of Gandhiji as a kind of messiah, as someone who would help them overcome their misery and poverty. Gandhiji wished to build the class unity, not the class conflict. Yet the peasants could imagine that he would help them in their fight against zamindars, and agriculture laborers believed he would provide them land. At times, ordinary people credited Gandhiji with their own achievements. For instance, at the end of a powerful movement, the peasants of the Pratapgarh in the United Province managed to stop the illegal eviction of tenant, but they felt it was Gandhiji who had won this demand for them. At other times, using Gandhiji name, tribal and the peasants undertook actions that did not conform to Gandhian ideals. फिर happenings of 1922-1929. Mahatma Gandhi, as you know, was against the violent movement. He abruptly called off the non-cooperation movement when in February 1922, a crowd of the peasants set fire to a police station in Chori Chora. 22 policemen were killed on that day. The peasants were provoked because the police had fired on their peaceful demonstration. Once the non-cooperation movement was over, Gandhiji followers stressed that the Congress must undertake constructive work in the rural areas. Other leaders such as Chitta Ranjan Das and Motilal Nehru argued that the party should fight elections to the council and enter them in order to influence the government policies. Through sincere social work in the villages in the mid 1920s, the Gandhians were able to extend their support base. This proved to be very useful in launching the civil disobedience movement in 1930. The two important developments of the mid 1920s were the formation of the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh (RSS), a Hindu organization, and the Communist Party of India. These parties have held very different ideas about the kind of country India should be. Find out about the ideas with the help of your teacher. The revolutionary nationalist Bhagat Singh too was active in this period. अब यार ये देखो चित्ता रंजन दास कौन है? He is a major figure. He was a lawyer from East Bengal. He was especially active in the non-cooperation movement. फिर देखो demonstration opposed the Simon Commission. In 1927, the British government in England decided to send a commission headed by Lord Simon to decide the Indians' political future. The commission had no Indian representative. The decision created an outrage in India. All the political groups decided to boycott the commission. When the commission arrived, it was met with demonstrations with a banner saying Simon go back. The decade closed with the Congress resolving to fight for Purna Swaraj, complete independence in 1929 under the presidentship of Jawaharlal Nehru. Consequently, Independence Day was observed on 26 January 1930 all over the country. Revolutionary nationalists such as Bhagat Singh, Chandrasekhar Azad, Sukhdev wanted to fight against the colonial rule and the rich exploiting classes through a revolution of workers and peasants. For this purpose, they founded the Hindustan Socialist Republican Association at Firozshah Kotla, Delhi. On 17 December 1928, Bhagat Singh Azad Rajguru assassinated Saunders, a police officer who was involved in the lathi charge that had caused the death of Lala Lajpat Rai. On 8 April 1929, Bhagat Singh and B.K. Dutt threw a bomb in the Central Legislative Assembly. The aim, as the leaflet explained, was not to kill but to make the deaf hear and to remind the foreign government of its callous exploitation. Bhagat Singh, Sukhdev, and Rajguru were executed on March 23, 1931. Bhagat Singh's age at that time was only 23. The march to Dandi. The Purna Swaraj would never come on its own, it had to be fought for. In 1930, Gandhiji declared that he would lead a march to break the salt law. According to this law, the state had a monopoly on the manufacturing and the sale of salt. Mahatma Gandhi, along with other nationalists, resonated that it was sinful to tax salt since it is an essential item of a food. The Salt March related the general desire of the freedom to a specific grievance shared by everybody, and thus did not divide the rich and the poor. Gandhiji and his followers marched for over 240 miles from Sabarmati to the coastal town of the Dandi, where they broke the government law by gathering natural salt found on the seashore and boiling sea water to produce the salt. Women in the freedom struggle. Amba Bai from Karnataka. The women from the diverse background participated in national movement. Young, single, old, married, rural, urban, conservative, liberal homes. Both British officials and Indian nationalists felt that women participation gave the national struggle an immense force. They went out of their homes. It gave them a place in the professions in the governance of India and paved the way for equality with men. Amma Bai of Karnataka married at age 12, widowed at 16. She picketed foreign clothes, liquor shops, and Udupi. She was arrested, served a sentence, re-arrested. She made speeches, taught spinning, organized Prabhat fairies, regarded as happiest days of her life because it gave her a new purpose and commitment. During the salt satyagraha, for instances, even Mahatma Gandhi was initially opposed to women participation. Sarojini Naidu had to persuade him to allow the women to join the movement. फिर देखो क्या है. Sarojini Naidu with Mahatma Gandhi, Paris, 1931. Active in the national movement since the early 1920s, Naidu was a significant leader of the Dandi March. She was the first Indian woman to become the president of the Indian National Congress. Veer Lakhan Nayak was hanged. Baji Muhammad, president of the Nabarangpur Congress, Orissa. Reported that Veer Lakhan Nayak, he was a legendary tribal leader, was hanged. Baji Muhammad mobilized 20,000 people to join the national struggle. He offered satyagraha, participated in the protest against the Second World War and in the Quit India movement, and served long jail terms. अब देखो डांडी मार्च में peasant tribal women all participated in the large numbers. A business federation published a pamphlet on the salt issue. The government tried to crush the movement through the brutal action against the peaceful Satyagrahis. Thousands were sent to jail. The combined struggle of the Indian people bore fruit when the Government of Indian Act of 1935 prescribed provincial autonomy and the government announced elections to the provincial legislatures in 1937. The Congress formed governments in 7 out of 11 provinces. In September 1939, after 2 years of the Congress rule in the provinces, the Second World War broke out. Critical of Hitler, Congress leaders were ready to support the British war effort, but in return they wanted that India be granted independence after the war. The British refused to concede the demand. The Congress ministries resigned in protest, quit India, and later Mahatma Gandhi decided to initiate a new phase of the movement against the British in the middle of the Second World War. The British must quit India immediately, he told them. To the people, he said, do or die in your effort to fight the British, but you must fight non violently. Gandhiji and other leaders were jailed at once, but the movement spread. It especially attracted peasants and the youth who gave up their studies to join it. Communications and symbols of the state authority were attacked all over the country. In many areas, the people set up their own governments. The first response of the British was severe repression. By the end of 1943, over 90,000 people were arrested and around 1 lakh killed in police firing. In many areas, orders were given to the machine gun crowds from the airplanes. The rebellion, however, ultimately brought the Raj to its knees. Towards independence and partition. Meanwhile, in 1940, the Muslim League had moved a resolution demanding independent states for the Muslims in the northwest and eastern areas of the country. The resolution did not mention partition of Pakistan. Why did the League ask for an autonomous arrangement for the Muslims of the subcontinent? From the late 1930s, the League began viewing the Muslims as a separate nation from the Hindus. In developing this notion, it may have been influenced by the history of tension between some Hindu and the Muslim groups in the 1920 and 1930s. Uh, More importantly, the provincial elections of 1937 seemed to have convinced the League that the Muslims were a minority and they would always have to play second fiddle in any democratic structure. It feared that the Muslims may even go unrepresented. The Congress' rejection of the League desire to form a joint Congress League government in the United Province in 1937 also annoyed the Muslim League. The Congress' failure to mobilize the Muslim masses in the 1930s allowed the League to widen its social support. It sought to enlarge its support in the early 1940s when the most Congress leaders were in jail. At the end of the war in 1945, the British opened negotiations between the Congress, the League, and themselves for the independence of India. The talks failed because the League saw itself as a sole spokesperson of India's Muslims. The Congress could not accept this claim since a large number of Muslims still supported it. Elections to the provinces were again held in 1946. The Congress did well in the general constituencies, but the League Sussex and the seats reserved for Muslims was spectacular. It persisted with its demand for Pakistan. In the March 1946, the British cabinet sent a 3-member mission to Delhi to examine this demand and to suggest a suitable political framework for a free India. This mission suggested that India should remain united and constitute itself as a loose confederation with some autonomy for the Muslim majority areas. But it could not get the Congress and the Muslim League to agree to specific details of the proposal. The partition now became more or less inevitable. After the failure of the cabinet mission, the Muslim League decided on the mass agitation for winning its Pakistan demand. It announced 16th August 1946 as a direct action day. On this day, the riots broke out in Calcutta, lasting several days, resulting in the death of thousands of people. By March 1947, violence spread to different parts of northern India. Many hundred thousand people were killed. Numerous women had to face untold brutalities during the partition. Millions of the people were forced to flee their homes, torn asunder from their homelands. They were reduced to being refugees in the alien lands. The partition also meant that India changed, many of its cities changed, and a new country, Pakistan, was born. So the joy of a country's independence from the British rule came mixed with the pain and the violence of the partition. The refugees from the riot torn Punjab gathered in New Delhi in search of shelter and the food. Subhash Chandra Bose is a radical nationalist and socialist leanings. Bose did not share Gandhiji's ideal of ahimsa, though he respected him as a father of nation. In January 1941, he secretly left his Calcutta, went to Singapore through Germany, raised the Azad Hind Fauj or Indian National Army. To free the India from British control in 1944, the INA tried to enter India through Imphal, Kohima, but the campaigns failed. The INA members were imprisoned and tried. People across the country for all walks of life participated in the movement against the INA trials, Indian National Army, and the Bose. फिर मौलाना आज़ाद with other members of the Congress Working Committee Sevagram 1942. Azad was born in Mecca to a Bengali father and Arab mother, well versed in many languages. He was a scholar of Islam and exponent of the notion of Wahadat-e-Deen, the essential oneness of all religion. He was an active participant in Gandhian movement, a staunch advocate of Hindu-Muslim unity. He opposed to Jinnah's two-nation theory. Chakravarti Rajagopalachari speaking to Gandhiji before Gandhi Jinnah talks 1944. A veteran nationalist and leader of salt satyagraha in the south, C. Rajagopalachari, known as Rajaji, served as a member of interim government of 1946 and as Free India's first India Governor General. Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, important role in negotiation for independence during 1945-47. Hailed from an impoverished peasant proprietor family of Nadia, Gujarat. A foremost organizer of the freedom movement from 1918 onwards, Patel served as a president of Congress in 1931. Muhammad Ali Jinnah with Mahatma Gandhi, Bombay, September 1944. Ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity until 1920. Jinnah played important role in making of the Lucknow Pact. He reorganized the Muslim League after 1934 and became the major spokesperson for the demand for Pakistan. फिर general constituencies, election districts with no reservations for any religious or other community. Nehru was an architect of the national movement and of free India's economy and polity. General constituencies, election districts with no reservations for any religious or other community. Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, the Pashtun leader from the northwest frontier province, at a peace march through Bihar. He is also known as a Badshah Khan. He was the founder of Khodai Khidmat Gars, a powerful non-violent movement among the Pathans of his province. Badshah was strongly opposed to partition of India. He criticized his Congress colleagues for agreeing to the 1947 division. The nationalism in Africa, the case of Ghana. The late 19th and early 20th century witnessed the rise of nationalism in many Afro-Asian countries. In many of these, nationalism arose as a part of anti-colonial struggles for independence. The colonial rule in Africa was dictatorial. Only the chiefs were allowed to rule on behalf of the foreign powers. Alternatively, the laws affecting Africans were created in all white legislatures. Africans had no decision making powers or representation. Not until after the Second World War, at least. The forcible takeover of the land from the local owners or the users, the increased taxation, poor working conditions led to many African protests. In 1957, Ghana, known until then as the Gold Coast, became the first sub Saharan African country to gain independence. The freedom movement was led by Kwame Nkrumah Convention People Party through strike, boycott, mass rally. In 1951, this party won a huge electoral victory. It opposed the existing system in which the British rules had allowed the chiefs to nominate representatives to the legislatures. It pressed the British to grant a legislature that contained no nominated or special members and won this demand in 1954. Elections to the new Legislative Council were held in 1956. The Convention People Party won these, thus paving the way for the proclamation of an independent nation under the name Ghana. ठीक है